What happens when a US president walks into Israel's parliament, the Knesset, to talk about peace and gets interrupted by lawmakers shouting, "Recognize Palestine"? Yeah, that actually happened. And the reactions? Applause, chaos, and a whole lot of global headlines. Today we're talking about a protest that cut through Trump's speech, why it matters, and what it says about the new phase of Middle East politics where symbolism can be louder than policy. So here's what went down. Trump was in Jerusalem, standing before members of the Israeli Knesset, giving a speech about a new ceasefire in Gaza. A ceasefire that, according to him, marked a triumph for Israel and the world. He was thanking Arab and Muslim nations for their role in negotiating the release of hostages held by Hamas. You know, that diplomatic moment every president dreams of. Peace deal, applause, legacy secured. And then, boom, two lawmakers stand up, Ayman Odeh and Ofer Kassif, both from the Hadash party, part of Israel's Arab-Jewish leftist coalition. They hold up signs that say, "Recognize Palestine." Instantly, chaos. Security moves in, the speaker bangs his gavel, and they're escorted out of the chamber, while other lawmakers clap to drown out the disruption. Yes, they literally applauded the protest being silenced. That's like someone getting kicked out of class, and the whole room starts cheering like it's a touchdown. Trump looks around and goes, "That was very efficient." And just like that, continues his speech. That one line, dry, smug, oddly comic, tells you everything about how political theater works. Now, let's talk about what Ayman Odeh and Ofer Kassif were actually protesting. Their message wasn't random. They weren't just heckling for attention. They were using the world's biggest political spotlight to send one message. Peace means nothing without justice, and justice begins with recognizing Palestine. That's a bold stance, especially inside the Israeli parliament, in front of a foreign president whose administration has historically stood closer to Israel's government than almost any other. After being removed, Odeh posted on X, "The amount of hypocrisy in the plenum is unbearable. Flattery for Netanyahu does not absolve this government of crimes against humanity committed in Gaza, nor of responsibility for the blood of Palestinians and Israelis alike." Now, you can agree or disagree with his tone, but the fact is, his protests hit a nerve, because while Trump was praising Israel's triumph, Gaza was still reeling from destruction. Let's zoom out. Trump's speech wasn't just about peace, it was part of a carefully staged victory tour. He arrived in Tel Aviv after a ceasefire deal that ended a 2-year war. Yes, 2 years that began on October 7, 2023, when Hamas attacked Israel, killing about 1,200 people and taking around 250 hostages. Israel responded with a massive military campaign that Gaza's health ministry says killed over 67,000 Palestinians. Those numbers, they are not just statistics. They are lives, families on both sides destroyed in a war that became a humanitarian catastrophe. The ceasefire deal, the one Trump was celebrating, included Hamas releasing 20 Israeli hostages and Israel releasing nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. Trump called it a triumph for Israel and the world. But shows attention. If one side calls it peace and the other side calls it survival, can it really be both? And that's what Odeh's protest symbolized, that this triumph came with unfinished business, recognition, justice, and the status of Palestine. Let's be clear, protests inside parliament aren't new. They happen all over the world, but this one was different because of where and when it happened. Trump wasn't just any foreign leader. He was a man who, during his first presidency, moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, cut aid to UNRWA, the Palestinian Refugee Agency, and recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. To many Israelis, he's a hero. To many Palestinians, he's a symbol of bias. So when protesters stood up shouting, "Recognize Palestine," they weren't interrupting Trump, they were interrupting a narrative. Because that's what politics is, a battle of narratives. And every time a ceasefire is called, every time a handshake is televised, there's always a question in the air. Who gets recognized and who gets erased? Let's talk about Trump's approach to the Middle East, because it's not just policy, it's performance. Trump's speech in the Knesset was designed to show American strength and deal-making skill. He said, and I quote, "We had a lot of help from a lot of people you wouldn't suspect. It's an incredible triumph for Israel and the world." That's classic Trump, always vague enough to sound impressive, but confident enough to sound historic. But this visit, this ceasefire ceremony, wasn't just about diplomacy, it was about optics, about being seen as a man who ended the war. And to be fair, ending a war, even temporarily, is better than continuing one. But peace that leaves one side unrecognized often plants the seed for the next war. This isn't just an Israel-Palestine story. It's a story about how protest and diplomacy now coexist in the same frame. Ayman Odeh knew cameras were rolling. He knew his words would trend globally before the applause even ended. Because in 2025, politics doesn't just happen in chambers, it happens online instantly. And this moment, captured, shared, debated, will fuel conversations far beyond the Knesset. Already, we have seen massive shifts in how the world views the conflict. The UN vote to recognize Palestine as a state gained momentum. Western governments are split between supporting Israel's security and calling for Palestinian sovereignty. Arab states that normalize relations with Israel are under pressure from their own citizens. So that tiny protest, two men with signs, wasn't chaos. It was clarity, a reminder that amid all the speeches, ceasefires and deals, the core issue remains unsolved. Trump ended his visit by declaring, quote, "The war is over." But history tells us, in this region, wars rarely end, they pause. Ceasefires hold until they don't. Leaders shake hands until they can't, and protesters keep shouting until someone finally listens. When Trump's plane lifted off from Tel Aviv to Egypt, 8 trucks were lining up for Gaza, a territory flattened, traumatized, and waiting to rebuild. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, lawmakers applauded the silencing of dissent. And that's the paradox of modern politics. We celebrate peace while ignoring the voices that demand it. I'm Mazhar, and this was today's deep dive. If you found this helpful, hit like, share, and tell me your thoughts in the comments.